We heard there Donald Trump speaking about retaliation, and on that note, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has been straining to stick up for his country, of course, as he seeks election later this month, and has promised to get rid of those US levies. Canada began imposing a 25% tariffs on certain US auto imports this Wednesday, retaliating against President Trump's levies on auto and parts imported into the country. The White House has confirmed, following the announcement that we heard earlier, that US tariffs on goods imported from Canada, as well as Mexico, you'll remember, will not be affected by the 90-day pause announced earlier. For more on this, we're joined by our correspondent, Christopher Guly, who's standing by. What reaction has Canada had to that latest announcement?
Well, it's a wait-and-see approach on this one. As you mentioned, the counter tariffs from Canada on U.S. automobiles and parts for automobiles kicked in today. So those vehicles and parts for vehicles that aren't compliant with the U.S. Canada-Mexico trade agreement will face these levies. We're not caught in the 10% tariff that Trump announced a little while ago. It's hard to keep track of all these announcements, but basically it's been a pretty quiet day in terms of Canada's response to the Trump administration on the tariff front.
And as I mentioned also, there is the election come up. What effect has this big feud with the southern neighbour had on that election?
Well, that's the big story. A huge impact. It's affected the whole election. It transformed what was 2 months ago a race for the Conservatives to lose has now become a race that seems that the Liberals are going to win and have a fourth term in office. And it's all because of Donald Trump. Polls are showing that when Canadians are asked who would you like best to be Prime Minister to deal with the U.S., it's Mark Carney, the new Liberal leader and Prime Minister. So the whole conversation surrounding the election, issues that are still real, cost of living issues, inflation, price of groceries, mortgage payments, rent, are still important, but it's now what impact these Trump tariffs will have on Canada. How many jobs will be lost as a result? What will be the direct impact on the Canadian economy? We've seen over the last 24 hours alone what's happened on the stock market. So Donald Trump is the big opponent for all the parties in this election, and all the major parties, Liberals and Conservatives in particular, are always talking about the U.S. In particular, Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, has set his sights on Donald Trump.
And what exactly has Pierre Poilievre been saying? Has he got a different direction that he would take compared to Mark Carney?
Absolutely, on policy issues. But it's interesting. It's an interesting question because he's often been compared to Donald Trump light. And in recent days, he's been holding rallies and he's been asking the crowd, how many people do you think are at this rally? Oh, do you think that Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, would have had as many people at his rally? Very much out of the Donald Trump playbook. That said, he's also, while he's imitating Trump, consciously or not, he's also determined to set a big distance between himself and the Trump administration, and being very, very hard in terms of how he would negotiate with Donald Trump. By comparison, Mark Carney has also been direct in terms of how he would handle the U.S. administration under Donald Trump, but he has softened his stance. He doesn't often mention Donald Trump by name. And you'll remember not that long ago, Donald Trump referred to Mark Carney as Prime Minister and said that after this election, the two leaders would sit down and talk about this new economic and security arrangement. At the same time, Trump has taken shots at Poilievre, and I think he said something that had made some stupid remarks about Trump, and he's not a MAGA guy. So what's happened is that Canadians are saying, okay, who's the best leader to take us into the next 4 years? Do we want a career politician, a conservative, who doesn't seem that well liked by Trump? That's perhaps a secondary issue. But more importantly, do we want a steady-as-she-goes leader, Mark Carney, former central banker, Bank of England, Bank of Canada, significant experience on Wall Street with Goldman Sachs, and he looks prime ministerial. I've talked with conservative insiders who've said that when they watched Pierre Poilievre on the campaign hustings, they say he seems like he's running to be opposition leader, not prime minister. So we're less than 3 weeks away from voting day. We'll see.
Christopher Guly, thank you very much for that analysis on the situation and responses from Canada to the Trump tariffs. Move on now to other world news.